Good evening, everyone. I'm Aditya Yeratore, a graduate student here at Boston University and an organizer for BUCLD 50. Shortly, we will have our keynote address. But first, we would like to thank our sponsors, Cascadilla Press and Duolingo. We would also like to thank our funders, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, and the BU Associate Provost for Research Offices. Their support has made this conference possible. We would also like to thank you, our community, for your generous donations to our Student Travel Fund, which has allowed us to fund some students to travel to this conference. Before we turn to the keynote, we want to draw your attention to a project that we were working on here at BUCLD 50. We are recording memories, stories, and reflections for a documentary video that will be released after this conference. You can see clips of the first interviews that we did so far at the top of the stairs when you enter. We want to include all of you, and we invite you to record yourselves in the interview station at the corner of the lobby. Please come with friends and have a chat. Now, we would like to present Nan Bernstein-Ratner from the University of Maryland, who will be introducing tonight's keynote speaker, Jean Berko Gleason, Professor Emerita of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Boston University.
I got Virginia's box from yesterday. Okay, let's see how this works. So first of all, I just have to look out at the audience and say that if somebody had told me when I got here in 1976, so actually I have a 50-year tag, but it's slightly dishonest. I rounded up. My father, the insurance salesman, used to do that all the time on people's ages. But if somebody had told me in 1976 when I was at the second that I'd be here introducing somebody for the 50th, I think, I probably would have just dropped dead of sheer disbelief. But it is really wonderful to be here back at BU. I do try and come every year, and to introduce tonight's keynote speaker. She's certainly somebody whose name is well known to most people. But as I'll say in only a few remarks to introduce her, her impact on a number of fields is probably underestimated. So I'd like to say only a few things before letting Jean tell you more about herself and her work. So let's see how this works. There we go. Jean hails from a background that might be similar to that of a lot of people in the audience. She was a first-generation college student and PhD recipient. Both she and her brother did get PhDs, who grew up in a heritage language-speaking household. That language was Hungarian, in Cleveland. She was a product of the public school system and went to Harvard on the recommendation of an older classmate from her high school, and has not really left the Boston-Cambridge area for a very long time ever since. And there is a picture of her graduating with her degree from Radcliffe, being handed her degree by her husband, Andy, and a picture of her with one of her 3 daughters. She had 3 young daughters in very close succession shortly after getting her degree, and so sort of like the stories about Ginger Rogers, who did it all, in a long dress and high heels backwards. Okay, a lot of what Jean did, she did under some circumstances that some of us might have considered challenging. Jean's name is pretty much synonymous at this point with a very famous little creature, the Wug. In 1958, when Jean was the grand old age of 27. Now, I'd like you all to think about this. If you're older than that, What were you doing at the age of 27? And if you're younger than that, be very afraid, okay? What do you, aspire to do by that age? And at that point, the word wug entered not only the English language, but a global field of study that continues to explore what the use of nonce words can tell us about the human mind, language development, and language learning. And it's become pretty much a meme, as most of us know. So, whoops, there we go. So in both popular imagination and in everyday life, if I had a nickel for every student at the University of Maryland that sports either Wug tattoos, Wug paraphernalia, Wug earrings, I'd be quite wealthy. We can now play Wug games to show that children know most of the regular affixes of their ambient language. Oh, I forgot to show you one picture that's my favorite, sorry. Not that one, not that one. This is my favorite. Okay. Only a few of us have the original of that one. We can play Wug games to show that children know most of the regular affixes of their ambient language and their allomorphic variants from a very young age. And we can even play such games to show that adults can use the right allomorphic forms to inflect words that don't even match their native phonology. So I ask all of you to consider that if you're English speaking, that if something belonged to Johann Sebastian Bach, it's Bach's. And we know that, even though we don't have that sound in the English language. Right? So it's a very deep insight. Years ago, Lisa Menn and I wondered if the Wug was the most important invention in child language development research since the invention of audio recording. I still stand by the possibility that that's true. Very soon after the publication of The Child's Learning of English Morphology, Jean, along with Roger Brown, her mentor, went on to author very groundbreaking articles and chapters on psycholinguistic research methods. But there was much more, some of which I think people at this meeting might not appreciate. So for instance, her longstanding research relationship with the renowned ephesiologist Harold Goodglass produced work fundamental to understanding agrammatism. Whoops, let's see, there we go, sorry. Too much flying in, I apologize. To understanding agrammatism in Broca's aphasia, and constitutes some of the first efforts to conduct linguistic analysis on language comprehension as well as production in speakers with aphasia. That's not something we at this meeting much appreciate at this point. She was also one of the first people to be interested in the social contexts in which children learn language. She was interested in father's speech when few others were, presaging work that really didn't get undertaken in earnest until much more recently. She investigated gendered language and communication functions of social routines in children's development, and made many insights into the roles of routines in children's development. And for many of us, having only just recently experienced Halloween, we've been circulating for many years the article that she wrote on the social functions of trick or treat, for instance. Many people in the room probably don't know of Jean's tireless work on behalf of a historically and globally marginalized and disparaged community, the Roma, otherwise known by some people as gypsies, with Zita Rager. She was able to document that the Roma have rich routines that foster their children's development at a time when they were viewed as socially, basically disadvantaged by other people. Jean has also always been on the cutting edge of new technologies as well as evolving concept development. Many people also probably don't know that she was one of the earliest contributors to this Childis initiative, and her work on its first major program project grant was instrumental in major ways, both in contributing an often cited corpus, the dinner table conversation, so to speak, as well as early efforts in computational tool development of what is now known as TalkBank. In recent years, Jean has spent energy channeling her teaching and mentoring skills into textbook writing, first the text Psycholinguistics, which was one of the very few texts in the area when it was first published, and subsequently her text The Development of Language, which is now in its 10th edition and has been translated into numerous languages worldwide. Some of you may have had your first encounters with the topic of developmental psycholinguistics or language development through one of those books. As befits someone who's made so many contributions to so many fields, Jean has been honored as a fellow of the AAAS and the American Psychological Association and has received the Roger Brown Award from the International Association for the Study of Child Language, and a list of honors much too long to detail here. But the one she really wanted to be sure that I included when I introduced her was an honorary degree from Washington and Jefferson College in the same year that the civil rights icon John Lewis was also celebrated. It was actually, she thinks of it as one of the real highlights of her life. Before I turn the microphone virtually over to Jean, I'd like to say only a couple of words about Jean herself as a person. She's been just a super mentor to me all these years. Still, and starting with my very first professional talk, which was here at this meeting in the conference auditorium. It still gives me the willies. As most of you would identify, I gave that talk, and the very first person up at the mic, right, the person up at the mic, asked a question that had me like the deer in the headlights. And I was just mortified and thought I would never, ever give a professional talk again. And Jean talked me off the ledge and has been mentoring me ever since. She's funny and insightful and a joy to know. And it has been and continues to be my privilege to now give you Jean Berko Gleason.
Okay, am I ready to go? I can't tell if everybody can hear me.
Yes,
Is it
I
okay?
can hear you.
Are we ready to begin here? Okay, I have to turn something off on my screen. It says, don't show this again. Okay, I'm unmuted. Is that correct? Okay, are we ready now? Okay, so thanks, Nan, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to everyone at BU for the invitation to speak and for all the years of running this incredible conference. I also like to say hi to our colleagues from other countries who have come to the conference either in person or virtually. I hope you know how much we love and value you. So, bienvenue, Nadrahau, Ahlo, Saflam, and all of those things that people say. I am addressing you as your guest, not from Boston University, but from my home in Cambridge tonight. I've lived in this house since 1959, just a year or so after we published the article that contains the Wug Test. And today I'm going to talk about that ancient history, as well as a few of the things my colleagues and I have done since then. I'll end with some recent artificial intelligence thoughts, and then I'll talk about what it was like giving the Wug Test to Chat GPT-4 rather to a 4-year-old. And on the way, If we have the time, I'd like to give you the Wug Test, because I think if you haven't had the Wug Test lately, you should have it. Okay, so the Wug Test revealed that even very young children have sophisticated knowledge about language. My daughter Pam Gleason has recently restored the original pictures, so that's what I'm going to be using. The world has changed a lot since 1959 when it was designed, and I need to point out some of the things we would have to change in a contemporary Wug test and what that says about the nature of research. I think we need to remember that we are creatures of our times and that the questions we ask and the way we ask them are constrained by the contemporary world we live in. So there were things we did then that we would not possibly do today. And that gives us the idea of you know, what 50 years from now, we may look back at the things we do today and feel that they were quite outrageous in some sense. So I was one of the people who was present for the beginning of the cognitive revolution that included an intense interest in thinking and the inner representation of language. So I'd like to tell you how I got there. Nan has told you some. Of course, you did it without the Hungarian accent I'm hoping to use. But my own interest in language has indeed been lifelong. I was, as Nan pointed out, born in Cleveland. That's because Hungarians go to Cleveland. I mean, that's what really happened. And I lived there until I went to college here in Boston at Radcliffe, which was just a way for women to go to Harvard. You know, in those days, Harvard wouldn't allow women. In fact, when I was first in Cambridge, women were not allowed in the front door of the Harvard Faculty Club. So if you're wondering what the world was like, that's what it was like. My parents were from the part of Hungary, now Romania, that is known as Transylvania. So that gives some ideas. And my mother was a native speaker of Hungarian. My father had been brought when he was about 10, and he was an English speaker. But I heard a lot of Hungarian growing up. My uncles talked Hungarian, and my mother has used Hungarian terms for English words that she didn't know, like body parts and dog poop and various things of that sort. The other thing is that my mother talked in her sleep in Hungarian. So I would hear in the night her deep Hungarian voice say, Joj Istenem, which means, oh my God. But I heard that a lot, I must say. I also heard her speaking to her sister on the telephone a lot. You know how kids are trying to overhear conversations? Well, all my mother was constantly saying was nem tudom, nem tudom. And it took me years to find out that nem tudom means I don't know. So there was a lot of things my mother didn't know, apparently. Anyway, so I had the Hungarian background, and I also had an older brother, as Nan pointed out, my brother Marty, and he was 6 years older than me. And he was a very sensitive and intelligent person, and he did get a PhD from Cornell. But he had cerebral palsy as the result of being a big baby born to a little bitty mother. So he was a difficult birth, and he had cerebral palsy. And as a result, people had a terrible time understanding what he said. But I was one of those people who could always understand him. So early on, I was sensitized to language, and I got to be his translator. So in that particular way, so the Hungarian background, the translating, and a long-term interest in language sort of got me there. So I left Ohio at 17 to go to college, and as an undergraduate, I majored in history and literature at Radcliffe and wrote my honors thesis on the Roma, actually, but that's another long story. I couldn't resist taking languages when I was an undergraduate, so I took French and German and Latin and Norwegian and Sanskrit. I read The Wild Duck in Norwegian, and in Sanskrit, I guess I read what everybody reads in Sanskrit. That first part of the Mahabharata where they talk about Prince Nala, Asi Draja Nalo Nama. Those of you who took Sanskrit probably all memorized that passage, and I did too. But I really loved. Isn't Sanskrit wonderful? I just loved Sanskrit. Anyway, so I took all those languages, but it really wasn't until my senior year that I took a course on the psychology of language but given by a young assistant professor just arrived from the University of Michigan, and it was Roger Brown. And And it was then that I realized that this is what I had to do. Really, how do we acquire a language? How do we lose it, store it, understand it, produce it? All of these questions were psycholinguistics, but actually, as the field did not yet exist. It was 1952 and there was no psycholinguistics. But it was the dawn of the cognitive revolution, which is why I'm talking about it at length, because the cognitive revolution made a huge difference in intellectual and psychological history in this country. So the confluence of a number of things had to come together to make the cognitive revolution. That included new technology and Nan mentioned tape recorders. Tape recorders were a big thing. And I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember what tape recorders looked like, but they came in giant things like suitcases. And when we used them, we had to hire people to carry them around. And they didn't hold as much as your phone holds now. But still, it was a technology that enabled us to record language and analyze it later. And before that, we couldn't do that. So new technology made a huge difference. New ideas came, and they put linguistics and psychology together. So people began to really think about, is there a psychological reality to the units that the linguist describes? Because that's what we were doing. We talked about, it was called isomorphism. In other words, are the units that the linguist describes the same as the ones that are actually working in your head? And nobody had an idea whether this was true or not. So those were the kinds of things we wanted to do. So in order to pursue these questions, I switched fields and went to linguistics for a master's degree. Of course, Harvard was all historical linguistics. People were taking Hittite and other fascinating things. But and then I switched to for both linguistics and psychology for the doctorate. That means that I had to fulfill all the requirements in both linguistics and psychology. That meant taking Old French and clinical psychology and all of those things. So Roger Brown was my advisor, and after getting my degree, I spent a postdoctoral year with him at MIT, which is why it says MIT in some of these publications, because we wrote a bunch of things together. Anyway, Roger was a wonderfully creative, intelligent, generous mentor. And Roger's students still love him. And I know this because I had recent conversations with just some of these people, with Steve Pinker, Howard Gardner, Ellen Winter, Helen Tager Flussberg, Dan Slobin, Peter and Jill de Villiers, Kenji Hakuda, and a number of other people who were all in the cohort of students of Rogers in, say, 10 years, beginning about 10 years after me. My cohort was the first cohort with Roger, and it included myself, Eric Lunenburg, who wrote on the biological foundations of language, and Don Hildum. I can't talk about the incredible body of research that these people have turned out in our fields. But if you're interested in Roger Brown's legacy, there is a very comprehensive book by Frank Kessel. It's called The Development of Language and Language Researchers, and it's available. It's essays in honor of Roger Brown. So, maybe wonder, where was Noam Chomsky in all this? Noam Chomsky was, of course, just getting established at this time, but we were not involved with him. In designing our studies, we were able to rely on descriptive linguistics. And descriptive linguistics had long been used by anthropologists and missionaries who wanted to be able to analyze and use any language that they encountered at home or in the field. So I got to take field methods courses with Del Himes and Charles Ferguson, and our useful textbook was called An Introduction to Descriptive Linguistics, and it was by a professor named Henry Allen Gleason, Jr. And by an odd coincidence, I met his younger brother, Andrew Gleason, when I was a graduate student, and he was a young mathematics professor at Harvard. And we got married in 1959. So a lot of people think that I married the wrong guy, the wrong one, but I didn't. I married the right one. So Andy and I became the parents of three daughters that that Nan mentioned, my daughters, Catherine, Pam, and Cynthia, who were born in the 2.5 years after I got my degree. And Annie and I were married for 49 years until his death some years ago. So Roger and I set out to see if even young children have internalized rules for dealing with language. Do they just imitate what they hear? If you would ask people at the time, how do kids learn language? Everybody would have said they imitate what they hear. That was the understanding. So that I also have to tell you about something which is very new. Bulletin. Uh, the 3 kids, I'm going to tell you about that all of this that I'm talking about happened before Roger embarked on his study with Adam and Eve and Sarah, the kids that he called Adam and Eve and Sarah. And you must have all studied Adam and Eve and Sarah. And their transcripts provided the dissertations from so many of the people I mentioned before, and launched the field, really, the first language, Roger's book. But I have an update for you on one of those early child participants. We were in touch with Adam not long ago. So we know about Adam, and Adam grew up to be a CEO and a philanthropist, and he is currently a college president. And last week, this week, he was elected lieutenant governor of one of our most important states. So that is what happened to Adam, and we put his picture in one of our textbooks, so it's okay to tell you that. So there you go. So just to get back to the research part, I settled on the basic parts of the English morphological system for my dissertation. That means inflectional, derivational morphology, and I'll run over that in a minute. So, but that was what we did. And as part of the Wug Test, I also, it's not in pictures, so it's not in the book, but I think maybe we should put it back in. We also ask kids not just about inflections and derivations. We ask kids about the compound words in their own vocabularies. We asked them why they thought they were called those things. And we found a very interesting thing. We were talking about kids between the ages of 4 and 7, by the way. We found that we asked them questions like, why do you think a birthday is called a birthday? And we found something rather interesting. We found that the littlest kids looked at you and said, because it is a birthday. I mean, they thought it was a dumb question. Why is it called a birthday? Because it's a birthday. And a little older kids would pick up on some salient feature. They say, it's called a birthday because you eat cake or you get presents. So it's a birthday. And only later you get some kids say it's a day. But mostly you don't. Mostly young kids stick with those salient features unless the salient feature is also part of the word. So if you ask them, why is a fireplace called a fireplace? Well, say it's a place where there's fire, because that's a salient feature as well. So that was an interesting thing that we did, and it gave me a chance to ask the LLMs about it later, which I mentioned, I hope. Okay, so I made the test using nonsense words that they'd never heard before to find out if they knew the rules. You know, can they make a new plural? Obviously I couldn't use real words, because if I said this is a dog, now there's another one, there are 2, they heard the word dogs, obviously. So that doesn't prove that they know how to make a plural. So I had to use nonsense words, so I made them up. And they're based on English phonology, obviously. So I made them up. And then I had to make the test, because, you know, in those days, we didn't have a department that made stimuli, so to speak. It meant I had to go to the Harvard Cooperative Society and buy a bunch of 5x7 cards and some colored pencils and make the test. So I made the test myself, drawing the pictures to represent the imaginary things like wugs and bics and tours and disses. And if you've seen the Wug Test, you know that I'm not a great artist, but the pictures are primitive, but they're good natured. So there we go. So I went out and I gave the test to 80 kids, and the results were clear and compelling. We didn't need analysis of variance. We used mostly chi-square in those days, but the results were kind of stunning, because the kids really had rules. We really found that. So I wrote it up, and I got my degree in 1958, and in June of 1958. And a month later, I presented the research at a meeting on aphasia at the Boston VA Hospital, and Uriel Weinreich was there. And Uriel Weinreich was the editor of the journal Word. He was one of the other participants. And Uriel was really fascinated by the whole notion. He was an expert on Yiddish. So he went home and he made up some little Wug Test items himself based on what I had said, but he used and asked them of his young daughter, who was 3 or 4 years old at the time. So he went home and he put things in front of her. He said, "This is a mish, now there's another mish." And he was just stunned when she performed exactly the way we said that she would perform. So he came back to the conference the next day and said, "Give me that paper." And he took it away and published it. So that was how I managed to get my degree in June of 1958 and have the article appear in print 2 months later in the August issue of Word. So life is full of happenstance. I mean, you just happen to be at a meeting where the editor is. It isn't, there are a lot of coincidences and a lot of happenstance and a lot of luck and a lot of bad luck, I will say as well. So anyway, so at this point, I don't know if I can really do it because I often say that I'm Zoom impaired. I'm going to try. I wouldn't mind if we actually could hear the audio on this because I would be happy if people could give responses. Does that make any sense? Let me see if I can get this up. It's called Share the Screen. They all told me that I could do this. Are they coming up? Am I sharing? Oh, all right. How did that work? Okay. Can everybody see this? Are you ready to take the Wug Test? First, I told you that I would make a little background here just to remind you. Obviously, everybody knows this. Now I have to punch the right things to make it work. Could you turn the sound on so people I can hear them? Because I would love, because I feel bad that I'm not there, but I would love to hear you or see you or something. I'm friendly. Okay, so how do I make it move? Am I sharing? You are screen sharing, so how do I make it? Okay, so here's what we were going to ask to the kids: inflection, derivation, and morphology in compounds. That's what we're talking about. So just to remind you, inflection doesn't change the part of speech or the basic meaning. It is just a grammatical function that deals with tense, person, number, and things of that sort. One wug, two wugs, etc. Or verbs or possessives or whatever. Derivation is a good word because it derives a new word. So you take a word like happy and you can make unhappy, or you can change dirt, the noun, into dirty with the e ending an adjective. So inflection, derivation, and compounds, which are very, very interesting and uh, very sophisticated in English, because when you put two words together, and alter the stress, you have a different meaning. So the difference between White House and White House is every adult speaker of English understands this, but kids don't get that distinction until they're around 9 years old. They use the words perfectly well, but if you give them to them in isolation, that's hard to do. Is it when you say hot dog, it's different from hot dog. But if you ask a kid, hot dog, is that a puppy that's been in the sun, or is it a thing that you're going to eat? That is hard for kids to do. But those are the things that we asked. Okay, and so the answers, and again, you know this, but I'm just reminding you so it makes sense when I run the pictures past you. Is that the plural is a so or a zo or an is. It depends on the stem, the root of the word. So if it ends in a voiced sound, it's a z, wads. If it ends in a unvoiced sound that is not an S, it ends in a S sound like wits. And if it ends in any kind of sibilant sounding, boy, that's hard to do, any kind of sibilant sounding sound, it's an us. And the third person of the verb and the possessive have similar forms. So if you learn one set, you learn pretty well the other sets as well. The progressive is invariant. It's just the ing as it's written in English. Eating, that's the progressive. The past tense is similar to the plural in that you add a t or a d, not a s or a z, depending on the root of the word. So you've got words like played with a d, hopped with a t, and planted for words that end in a alveolar or a stop of some sort. You have to add the ud ending to. Okay. So and then we added in the diminutive, which is not really is not a tense. It's not a it's a derivational form. Uh, Words like blanky, we thought that kids would have this because the speech to children is filled with diminutives. People say to children, put your footy in your jammies and go up to Betty. I mean, we especially to little girls, and some of the stuff that we did on gender differences. It's amazing the differences in speech to little girls compared to little boys, because we keep talking to little girls this way, and we drop it with little boys and are much meaner to them. But that's another story. I would love to talk about sex gender differences. But anyway, so it's very surprising to us when we discovered that even though they're surrounded with words like blanky, that they don't have it as a productive form. Okay. So, and then the agent in ER, in English, you can do that with practically any noun. You can turn it into an agent. So there you go. Okay. So now, are you ready? Can I hear you? Say yes. Oh, that's great. I much prefer that. Okay, so let's take the Wug test as quickly as we can. All right, this is a Wug. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two Wugs. Kids don't have a problem with that. Even, 4-year-olds have high percentages of get that. This is a gutch. Now, this is a sound that ends in a member of that sibilant class. Gutch, the way it's spelled doesn't make it clear, but it does end in a s sound. And children do not get that. When you ask them, what are two of them? They say two gutch without the us ending. This is a man who knows how to spow. He is spowing. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? What did he do? He spowed. Everybody gets that. That's an easy one for kids too. This is a cache. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two. Now this is interesting because the je sound is rare in English. I mean, people don't use. I mean, it depends on where you are in the country. Here we say garage, but I think if you go to Chicago, people say garage. They don't even say the je where we would all do it. But kids still recognized it as part of the sibilant series because with two cash. They did not put the us ending on it. This is a man who knows how to rick. He's ricking. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he ricked. Everybody's got that. By the way, do you know what he's holding? It's called a Morgenstern. You know what Morgenstern means? You got to speak Deutsch. Morning star. Looks like a morning star. Anyway, so that's very easy for kids. Ricked. They don't have a problem. Now, this is a Wug. I can't even see this. This is a very tiny Wug. What would you call a very tiny Wug? Well, we were hoping for Wuggy, okay? We were hoping for the diminutive, and let me tell you something, kids don't make them. Kids do not make, they don't do that. In fact, what they really said was things like a baby Wug. They made a compound. It's a baby Wug, whereas adults and LLMs have dozens of different possible endings. They say things like Wugette, Wugling, whatever. This Wug lives in a house. What would you call a house that a Wug lives in? Again, kids were not very good at that. Some of them said a bird cage. Adults are very good. You have a lot of words. They say a Wug hut. That's a good one. This is a Tor. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two. Now everybody knows there's a Tors with a Z. Even though phonology in English allows you to put either a S or a Z there. You can say Tors or Tors. The way you could say purrs or purse. But you have to know that the inflection is the z sound. So kids got this, but they didn't get it. Their percentages of being correct were not as high as they are with the simple ones that they don't have to make that choice, like Wug. Okay, this is a dog all covered with quirks. What kind of dog is he? He is we were hoping for the adjectival quirky. We didn't get it. For kids, they made a compound called quirk dog. This is a lun. This is another one. There are two of them. There are two luns. Again, this is like tors, lun. You could have hens and hence in English, but for the plural, it has to be the z. Again, so that was a little harder for kids, but they got it. This is a niz. Now, this is another one. There are two of them. Kids don't get two nizzes. It sounds like a plural, so just leave it alone. Adults don't have this problem. This is a man who does a mott. He's motting. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday if you're an adult, you said motted. If you're a kid, you said mott, because it sounds like a past tense. And if it ends in the T or a D, they just leave it alone. This is a cra. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two cras. Again, you could say cross, but cra. Now this is a task. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two. You know what kids didn't say. They didn't say tasks. They said two tasks. This is a man who knows how to bod. He's bodding. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he bodded, if you're an adult. He bod if you're a kid. This is a man who knows how to naz. So here we're talking about the verb. So he does it every day. So every day he, third person, nazes. No, kids could not get that. The pattern with the third person of the verb, similar to the plural. If you had to add the us ending, they couldn't do that. This is a heath. This is one that's fun too. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two. Adults are torn here because you have patterns like leaves. So some of them said heaps and some of them said heaves. You never find a kid who said heaves. They didn't have irregular patterns. They all said heaps if they made a plural. Now, this is a glass. Now there's another one. There are two of them. There are two. And the reason we put this in was because they did so terribly on one task, two tasks, that we wanted to be sure that they really truly had the form, and they absolutely did. They didn't have a problem. They 90% of them could tell you that it was two glasses. This is a man who knows how to gling. He's glinging. He did the same thing yesterday. What did he do yesterday? Yesterday he. If you're an English speaker, you have fun with this because all of the verbs in ing in English are irregular in the past. So adults say things like glang, glot, glung. They don't know what to say. Kids do not do that. Kids have an absolutely regular pattern. They say glinged. I mean, that's no problem with saying glinged. Okay, so this is a man who knows how to luge. He's luging. He does it every day. Every day he luges. Same story. I won't repeat myself. They didn't get the us ending. This is a man who knows how to bing. He's binging. He did the same thing yesterday. What did you do yesterday? Yesterday he, adults can say bing, bang, bong, whatever. Kids binged. No irregular patterns. This is a niz who owns a hat. Again, we're trying to get possessives and third persons that there's the same phonological shape. Whose hat is a niz's hat. Kids didn't get that either. So they're not good at that. Now, because kids all said binged, we were curious how they performed with the irregulars that all adults know about. So we put the bell in. So Bell a bell that can ring. Is that what it says? Okay, it is ringing. It did the same thing yesterday. What did it do yesterday? We were very surprised because kids didn't say rang. A great number of them said ringed. So there's no surprise that they said binged and glinged because they clearly were not in possession of even this very common irregular form. There's Wug who owns a hat, whose hat is it? Two Wugs, they both own hats. Similar story. I won't go into this. We're almost done. There's a couple more here. This dog has quirks on him. This dog has more quirks on him. And this dog has even more quirks on him. So this dog is quirky, and this one is quirkier. And this one is the, I got it, you got it, quirkiest. And that's not something kids could do. They might say something like quirky too. It's a hard one. So the comparative and superlative were not something that kids were dealing with either. This is a man who knows how to zib. What is he doing? He is easy. Zipping the progressive, no kid had a problem with that. It's just very easy for kids. But what would you call a man whose job is to zip? And here we found some interesting things happening because, again, some very few kids made it into an agent, a zibber, but more than that, we found the compounding pattern, which is that they said things like he's a zip man. And I told somebody else that I once got a letter from a man whose name was Zip Man, and he said, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't know it. Anyway, all right. So I got there are two more, I guess. This is an ice cube ice melts. We put this in again because we wanted to be sure the kids really knew how to make a past tense a word like that because they did so badly in words like botted, etc. No problem. They all knew how to say melted. They just did not have the extended pattern for words they didn't know yet, okay? And finally, it's Bick who owns a hat, whose hat is it, etc. And they perform the same way. Okay, so that's it for now. The results of the Wug test for inflection, that even 4-year-olds can make plurals and past tenses of words they've never heard before. They produce regular and simple forms. And their rule was to make a plural, add a so or a za. If it ends in a sound like that, just don't add it, just leave it alone. And the make a past, add a to or a do, but not an id. And they added nothing to words that already end in those sounds, okay? So children did not use irregular patterns. And with the derivational morphology, they did not use the diminutive. They provided the agent sometimes. They did not produce the adjectival form at all. They did not say it was a quirky dog, etc. They used compounding pattern and a baby wug for the diminutive, a zib man for the agent of one who zibs, and a quirk dog for the adjective of a dog covered with quirks. So that's basically it. That they're working on inflections, but not on derivations at that age. So what we said was, how do they acquire morphology? We don't know. The test proves it isn't rote memory. And are children forming analogies, or are they abstracting rules? We've been asking that question for 65 years, and I'm not sure we have any answer to it yet. So it's clearly not a result of direct teaching. That part we know. People do not sit down with their kids and say, here's how you make a possessive, sweetie, okay? So the Wug study had implications for cognitive strategies. It shows that kids really have been, operating in a way that may show universal processes. So that's it. So now we can begin to talk and ask if LLMs, by LLMs I mean large language models, if you're not doing artificial intelligence these days, can do what 4-year-olds can do. And that's one of the questions I want to come to, except I don't know what time it is. Okay. Oh, can we cut this out? No, I don't. Well, we can leave it. We can leave it. Okay. So we can leave it, but I don't want to see it. Is there some way we can not see it now? Never mind. Don't read this. Don't read this slide. Just don't look at this for a minute, okay? Because maybe I should stop. No, if I stop sharing, I'm afraid I'll lose you, and then I'll never find them again, and then I'll have to feel bad. You don't wish me to feel bad. So okay. So back to the Wug test. If you can not look at that. Back to the Wug test. What I'd like to say is there is bad news and good news. And the bad news about the Wug test, which it just stunned me. I didn't realize this until the past year or so, but I'm stunned. You know what the terrible problem is? It is incredibly sexist. The Wug test is unbelievably sexist. Every human in it is a man. This is a man who can. Did you not notice that there were no ladies in there? It was all men. Okay, so what can I say? man was the unmarked human in my day. You know, if you read the article that I wrote, The Child's Learning of English Morphology, everywhere that the child is talked about, it's he. That was the rule. The rule was you have to say he when you're referring to somebody. So that is the unmarked form, but the writing rule. But uh, the my own drawing of only men is rather shocking, I would say. If we did the test again, I'm sure we would think to add some females. But who knows what we are doing today might actually, in 50 or 60 years, be seen as outrageous because we are creatures of our times. And if there's any message I have to give this evening, it is that because things change and we may look back and say, I can't believe I did that. And well, you don't know what you're doing now that you'll say that about. So think about it. Anyway, the good news, of course, is that the Wug test replicates and the test is robust. So it was the first experimental demonstration that kids really operate with rules. They really do, not just memorize words. And if you give it to a 4-year-old today, you're going to get very much the same kind of answers. So this is not true of many studies in psychology. That, as you may know, there is a replication crisis out there. And a lot of studies have to be done in an exact way, otherwise you won't get the results, or you don't get the results at all. They just don't exist. So I'm happy to say that the Wug test, for now, seems to be enduring. Okay, so why does the Wug have a special place in our hearts is another question I might want to ask. I guess the good news part, because you've seen some, well, Nan showed you all those Wugs, and I have had people send me pictures of their wedding cakes with Wugs on top. So why are they holding this special place in our hearts? We know that the test shows something, you know, that didn't show before, but it also used made up or nonce words, which people didn't do. But there are other nonce words out there. I mean, for instance, there's perfectly fine research using words like blickets. You all know blickets, right? But I doubt that you have a T-shirt with a blicket on it or a coffee mug with a blicket on it. People, or that you will have a conference where you've got blickets decorating everything. So you have to ask, why do we like Wugs? And this is another topic that I would love to go into for several hours. But the real bottom line there is that uh, all of the nonce words used in the Wug test refer to living creatures, mostly animals. And the Wug is a little animal, and we love animals. And parents pass on a worldview that we love animals, but kids are already predisposed to it. You know, so there's a symposium on innateness here. I think one of our innate things is our love of the living world. It's called biophilia by people who know all those big words. But we do love living things, and we particularly love animals. So it's a shared love with our kids. So, you know, as I've said on other occasions, that when you go for a walk with a little kid, you say, look at the birdie, not look at the parking meter. And but it's living things above non-living things as well. So you might say, look at the tulip, but you don't say, look at the rock, or at least you would prefer to refer to tulips rather than rocks. So my colleague Brenda Phillips and I, who's now at the University of Derby, looked at what parents call kids' attention to. And they call their attention to animals at a great rate. In fact, you won't be surprised. So we looked at at um, at parents talking to about 60 kids, and we had many utterances which the parents said, look at or see the. So we said, well, what are they pointing out to kids? And of the 30 most common things that parents pointed out, 11 of them were animals. And can you guess what the number one animal was? An animal word? Anybody, is anybody saying anything in the audience? Somebody volunteer.
Dog.
What, she said dog, that's number two. Number one is kitty. And so you're not surprised that people are sitting in front of their phones watching kitty videos, right? Because it's part of our human nature to love animals. So adults may believe that living things are of particular interest to kids, and adults themselves are drawn to animals as part of our genetic inheritance, I think. We're attuned to the natural world, however hard we try not to be. So that's one explanation. Okay, now, since we need to finish this within the next something, I don't know how much time we have. Is there a timer here somewhere? I don't know what we're supposed to
10
end.
minutes,
Are we
10,
okay?
15 minutes.
Oh, we were good. We're good. If I talk double fast, I'll just put myself on speed. Okay. Okay. I'd like now, since I've talked about all this cognitive stuff and we've done other things, I'd like to get kind of to the almost opposite of it, because the cognitive research is things that's not taught to kids, and that kids learn by themselves, however they're doing it. So the kind of opposite of that is formulaic speech. And that was something that we got interested in some time ago. So it's very different from the cognitive-based inquiry, which, like the acquisition of morphology, in the formulaic speech is expressively taught. It's taught. We don't teach our kids how to say possessives. As I said, we don't sit down and say, "Here's how you make a possessive, sweetie," but they manage to do it. But they are explicitly taught these formulas, and that's what our work on formulaic speech was about, which we began in the 1970s. As research on child language progressed, many of us turned to broader questions like social aspects of language and to more diverse populations of kids to study. I missed a lot of the intense work on syntax conducted in the 1960s, much of it inspired by Chomsky's work, Syntactic Structures. That came out in 1957, and that had researchers thinking about, you don't even remember these terms, about transformations, phrase structure rules, deep structure, kernel sentences. I don't think there are many kernel sentences around anymore. Much of that has now been, as they say, updated, but syntactic theory has changed. So my own interest turned to questions often related to differences and variation among speakers rather than the universals and innate characteristics emphasized by the research on syntax. So these included some of the things that Nan mentioned in her kind introduction: speech to children, gender differences, work in the Roma community, father speech, and a number of other topics that shed light on how language makes us the people we are. As not a separate thing. I wrote all kinds of things called language and socialization, but so we studied interaction with other people rather than just the emergence of language in kids. So in our own lab here at BU, we turned our attention to these broader aspects of language. And for instance, what we called routines at the time and what is now called formulaic speech, and there is a whole field of formulaic speech. And that's where the high thanks and goodbye part of my title comes from. Early on, I had noticed that although the general consensus was that babies' first words were mama and dada, they weren't. Really, what kids were saying before that, even when they couldn't speak, was bye-bye, because everybody was making their child say bye-bye, which is obviously a routine because a child is formulaic. A child does not know what bye-bye means, okay? Parents are urging their kids to say bye-bye as a performative. You do it at the right time. You don't have to know what it means. So perhaps the best known of our studies in that period was one that Sandra Weintraub and I did on several Halloweens, and that was published in 1976. So I'm still talking ancient history. How am I ever going to catch up? I just have to skip several lifetimes in order to do it. We collected data on the American custom where children go door to door on Halloween, hoping for gifts of candy, and where they were expected to say, "Trick or treat," when the door is opened, "thank you" when they got the candy, and "goodbye" when they left. And this is a very constrained routine. I mean, for instance, ringing the doorbell and saying good evening would not be expected except under one circumstance. Do you know what that is? If the kid is dressed as Dracula. And if the kid is dressed as Dracula, then you'd have to say, good evening. And then everybody would know what it was. In fact, if I said to you, kid rang the doorbell and said, good evening, what was he dressed as? You'd all say, well, it's Dracula, of course, because we know this because we learned these routines early on. So we found that parents were actively teaching children to perform this routine. And for instance, one mother stood at the curb and called out to her son, don't forget to say trick or treat and thank you. By the way, in those days, we had just discovered little tape recorders, and we put them on the kids. So we had kids with backpacks with recorders in them. Anyway, the kids themselves also behaved in a very regular way that looked like a developmental stage of some sort. The youngest said nothing at all. The somewhat older kids said trick or treat. Somewhat older ones said trick or treat and thank you. And the oldest one said trick or treat and thank you and goodbye. So they did not know, because we asked them, we stopped a number of them and asked them, they did not know the meaning of the words trick or treat. Especially the little ones had no idea what a trick or a treat was. It was a formula that was performed, a performative kind of thing to do at the right time. So, so that's the thing about formulaic speech that is taught explicitly. Am I getting there with this? And it is the thing about the routines is that they're social conventions. They're not like something that stems from your cognition, since social, they're social performances and they change with society. So I bought a lot of candy last week and I answered the door myself. And guess what? Very few kids said trick or treat. I stopped a couple of them. I said, doesn't anybody say trick or treat anymore? And they laughed and they said trick or treat, but they didn't do it. And they also, with parents behave differently. I had a number of parents who came to the door with their children and they said thank you for the kids. So routines are a special kind of language that kids learn, but as I'm saying here, it's taught explicitly. Parents mark the teaching with the word say. You know, when they teach this, say bye-bye, say thank you, say goodbye, all of those things. And they're 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 performative and nobody explains what they mean. I mean, parents don't typically sit their kids down and say, here is what goodbye means, you know, God be with you. They don't explain that to children. So the thing, and the other thing I would say about the fact that it was different at my door is that they are reflections of society, which changes, and routines change as well. So that is that. Now, I'm not sure what my next slide is, but what I I want to get to the last part here, which should take a few minutes, which is this, that now we have come to a point after all these 50 years, and we can't recount what we did, but to sum up where I think our own work has gone as well as that of everybody else in the rest of the child language work, I would say that we have progressed from a purely cognitive approach to one that includes social and emotional components. We now include speech to kids as well as the child's language and the speech of not just mothers, but fathers and everybody else. And the range of children, if you look at the child's database, is stunning. The range of children included in research is now immense and with many different languages and children both typical and atypical for different kinds of societies. So that's good. So, and now we're on the brink, supposedly, of a new technological revolution in artificial intelligence that is impacting all of our lives, okay? We don't really know what kind of intelligence LLMs have, uh, but for instance, to what extent they can employ logic and inference and produce language that is more like a reflection of their ability to pull information from various kinds of text out there. So Gary, just very quickly, the people who work in LLMs, and I'm not really one of them except for the work we've done recently, that there are basically three kinds of artificial intelligence. The first one is artificial narrow intelligence. This means that they are able to perform fairly well in narrow domains. And clearly we're there. Clearly the LLMs, the computers can do a lot of things very well if they're limited to a particular domain. I like giving instructions to driving instructions, that's it. A second kind of artificial intelligence is called, and I noticed some papers in the conference here, is called artificial general intelligence. And that basically means that they're like people, that they're as good as people are. It'd be a much broader kind of ability that goes beyond finding examples of the likely next words in the database, et cetera. So I won't go on it. It includes inferences and reasoning and all kinds of things of that sort. So there's a lot of disagreement out in the world as to whether or not LLMs have general intelligence, and whether or not they're going to have it ever. And that's something that we can discuss. The third kind of artificial intelligence is ASI, artificial superintelligence, and it is the stuff of science fiction. That's the machines that become smarter than we are, who could replicate themselves and do more than we can, and who will take over and rule the world if we don't watch out. So the Wug test is an interesting way to see if LLMs have any of that general intelligence, since we can give them tests with words they don't know and can't therefore look up. So my colleagues, Patrick Jola and George Bicros and Nan Bernstein-Ratner and Lisa Mann and I set out to do that. And not surprisingly, the idea of presenting LLMs with versions of the Wug test also occurred to a number of other people. One group in Spain, for instance, tested a version of the Wug test with new nonsense words in 4 different languages. They used only plurals. And the languages they looked at were English, Spanish, Catalan, and Greek. Here's what they wanted to know. They wanted to know if success in producing the forms that were called for, was better predicted by their grammatical complexity or by the size of the database available in that language. And let me just quote what their results were. Here's what they say in their paper. The models are able to generalize morphological processes to unseen words with human-like accuracy. These are just pros. However, accuracy patterns align more closely with community size and data availability than with structural complexity. That's important. In particular, languages with larger speaker communities and larger digital representation, such as Spanish and English, revealed higher accuracy than less resourced ones like Catalan and Greek. Overall, our findings suggest that model behavior is mainly driven by the richness of linguistic resources rather than by sensitivity to grammatical complexity, reflecting a form of performance that resembles human linguistic competence only superficially. These findings suggest that while LLMs remain powerful pattern learners, their behavior reflects a distributional rather than structural grasp of language, one that mirrors human performance only at output, but not necessarily in the underlying mechanisms. In our own study, so I think that really says it in a very profound way, I think. In our own study, we asked ChatGPT-4, remember that 4-year-old? A variety of Wug test items, plus some additional ones using a bank of 20 new nonce words we made up. And here were our results, and we're going to be done very soon. Throughout the experiment, and this is from our paper, ChatGPT-4 generated appropriate plural forms, past tense verbs, possessive markers for the majority of the nonsense words provided. It had a variety of problems with derivational morphology. And unlike children, the LLM had trouble understanding the instructions. In one example, for instance, it had trouble filling in the blank. It was very, very difficult to make instructions that it understood, okay? It had trouble filling in the blank. It was supposed to fill in the blank with a form of the nonsense word blick. And it suggested that it was a typo and that we meant black. And then it went on to caution us about being sensitive when discussing matters of race. So that was one answer. Anyway, young children, by contrast, understood what was being asked of them. and sometimes emphasize their added morphology. We didn't find kids who didn't understand the question. They maybe couldn't answer it, but they tried, or they understood what was being asked of them, and it's hard to convince an LLM. So. So in comparing children and LLMs, it's also helpful to consider that LLMs do not do as well as 4-year-olds in some of the things, even though they have vastly more experience. By now, as researchers at this conference have pointed out, LLMs have been exposed to more than 2 trillion words. And by comparison, one human's database over a lifetime is an estimated 3 billion words. So they're absolutely immense amounts of data that they're looking at, but they're not getting a lot of the inferential things. I'm truly almost done. I was also curious to know if the LLM could think like a child. So I did a little mini study using the part of the Wug Test that isn't pictured, but simply asked children why they think the words in the vocabulary are called what they are. We found, I think I told you, the young kids say that it's called a birthday because it is a birthday, etc. And older kids emphasize the salient thing. Thanksgiving is called Thanksgiving because you eat turkey, etc. Even though they're taught that in school specifically, they basically 67% of them said because you eat turkey. So I asked ChatGPT 4 to answer some of the questions about compound words the way a 4-year-old would. I said, I want you to answer like a 4-year-old. And it said it understood. And I emphasized that it was to give the answers that a 4-year-old would. And here are some of its answers, okay? Answer the way a 4-year-old. Why do you think a birthday is called a birthday? Answer, well, because it's like a party day from when you got born. It's like a big yay, you showed up. Okay. Handkerchief. Why do you think a handkerchief is called a handkerchief? Because it's like a little blanket for your nose that you hold on your hand. It's a hand blankie. Thanksgiving. You're just giving thanks. It's like a big feast to say, hey, we're thankful for all the good stuff. Okay. And let me show you. Can I get to the next slide? There. This is the last example I want to give you. Co-pilot's answer is a 4-year-old question. Why do you think Friday is called Friday? Co-pilot. It's actually named after the Norse goddess Frigg. This is a 4-year-old. She was associated with love and beauty. So it's like a Frigg's Day questioner. So that's how a 4-year-old would answer. Co-pilot. Absolutely. It's all about making those complicated concepts into tiny little pieces. 4-year-olds love that stuff. So that was where I was with that. Anyway, okay. So these answers are obviously not possibly those that a 4-year-old might give. They are all etymological and just use exclamation marks and words like blankie, but are combined with adult explanations of both parts of the word. So what I think the Wug Test of various types, what the large language models show, is that LLMs does well on regular inflections, especially in languages that have a lot of speakers and a large body of data available. That does not imply that they are doing anything like what humans are doing in terms of processing. They are less successful with derivation of morphology. And when it comes to explaining words in a 4-year-old's vocabulary, they could talk like a stereotypical child, but they don't seem to be able to think like a child. There's no evidence of the organization of language you see in people. So at least for now, GPT, I'm saying it wrong, doesn't appear to know what a preschooler knows about language, and its performance only superficially resembles a child's. That doesn't mean that artificial general intelligence won't eventually be perfected, but we are not there now. So many of the things have happened. Many things have happened since 1958. We no longer see children as little Martians trying to decipher a strange code. Rather, they are little humans trying to join us. And language development is a shared human enterprise that involves extensive interaction between children and older speakers. It's not just cognitive, but a social and emotional achievement as well. There's also a human achievement. And we do not know if machines will ever reach the level of general intelligence that we see in children who can pass the Wug Test. Meanwhile, our job for the next 50 years is to carry on with our cooperative and human research. So thanks and goodbye.
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you. Jean, can you see me waving?
I can see you.
Okay,
You're
I think
very
we're going
tiny.
to
You're very
zoom the
tiny.
camera out.
I don't really see except your postage. Oh, that's better. There you are.
Okay.
Ivy. Thank you. Are the people still there? Hi, everybody.
Give
Hey.
Jean a round of applause.
It's so nice to see you. I'm sorry not to see you in person, but I don't want to tell you how old I am or why I'm not there, but it's a long story. I'm delighted. I'm delighted to have been given this chance.
Okay, I think the next thing that we're going to do is have people come up to this podium and ask questions here. That way, Jean will be able to see you as well as everybody. So please make a
Great.
line.
Thank you.
Go ahead, go ahead.
That's a familiar
Hi,
looking.
Jean.
I think I know you from somewhere.
I think you might. We had the same advisor, though not at the same time.
Well,
I
are you implying that I'm older than you, Steve?
just a bit, just a
Okay.
bit.
All right.
I think you did not give yourself enough credit for the development of modern artificial intelligence, because when the first neural networks were applied to language in the 1980s,
Oh, the Rummel-Hart guys. Yeah.
the Rummel-Hardt and McClellan model,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the
Well,
main test to show that neural networks could be applied to language was whether they could pass the Wug test.
yes.
And they did kind of,
Yeah.
a lot. They
Yeah.
also made errors such as the past tense of male is membled, which we today call a hallucination. And in
Yeah.
fact,
Yeah.
as you know, I and my former student, Gary Marcus, probed the strengths and weaknesses with Wug tests. Gary, to this day, is probably the foremost critic of large language models,
know
calling
that.
attention to hallucinations like male membled. And one other twist is that in an attempt to improve the performance of the models of that era, the Rummel-Hardt-McClellan model of the past tense had no hidden layers. It had an input layer, it had an output layer. The big advance was inserting a hidden layer, a layer with mental representations in between stimulus and response. Again, these were very soon tested on past tense and plural forms by Kim Plunkett and Virginia Marchman and others. Very soon after, Jeff Hinton, with Dave Rummel-Hardt, developed the first way to train hidden layer models, namely with error backpropagation, for which Hinton last year won the Nobel Prize. But very early on, to show that the hidden layer models trained by error backpropagation were up to the task, they were tested on past tense forms. And the fact that they could they did a passable job was one of the reasons that they became popular, and the rest is history. So thank you, Jean, for giving us artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Steve.
Hello. I wanted to thank you for all your wonderful examples. It's a great pleasure. I enjoy teaching them very much. I just wanted to add. I just wanted to add a couple of things to it a little bit. One is that you do get overgeneralizations of the weak system sometimes too. Like a kid, somebody said, does that fit into our car? And he put it in there and he said, look, it fat into the car.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
If you have fit sat, why don't you have fit fat?
Yeah.
But the more important point is, when I teach this, I point out that other kinds of syntactic rules can apply too, and kids get them. So if you read a book, you've done it twice, but you know, you can reread a book, and you can oversleep and oversleep, and you'll find that these prefixes can productively undergo recursion, and that's pretty interesting. But suffixes can't, and I've never seen a kid who would give a suffix to it. So it's if you have a tallish person, he isn't a tallish person, or strangeness doesn't go to strangeness. But the prefixes all seem to allow recursion, and that strikes me as a significant additional form of rule productivity that fits right onto what you've been arguing for.
Yeah, that's interesting. We should make a new test and add those things in.
Absolutely. I do it when I do it, and even with my
That's great.
grandchildren.
Those are great examples.
Good.
Thank you.
Now it, oh wow, this is loud. Now I know you get a lot of questions about linguistics, but what's your favorite food?
You said, what's my favorite food? Did you say-
Yes.
Is this going to cause me a problem if I admit to it?
Oh no, I just was curious because a lot of time.
My favorite food? I don't know if different things. I like clams. That's a terrible thing to say, isn't it? Oysters, but nothing higher in the ranks. Okay, hard to say.
Oh, I also had a real question too. So, if you could time travel into the future, what kind of question would you ask to the people of this futuristic society? Would it be about linguistics or food or something?
I think it would be about aggression. I think the main problem in the world today is aggression, and that if I would hope that people in the future would figure out a way, without my being sexist, to stop all of the male aggression that we see everywhere in the world. And until we control that, our world is going to be a mess. So that's my hope for the future, is to figure out how to stop people from doing that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jean. Let's give her another round of applause.
Thank you.